Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hello, Bartek. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Ryan. How are you?
I'm feeling a lot of things. Many things are just bubbling inside of me right now. I can't just pick one. That's where I'm at. Complications. Perhaps we need to have this episode discussion where all of the listening people out there, they have to sit at a certain eye level. That's a bit lower down, perhaps like how Japanese people do when they sit at home and have it sit in that pose for the whole thing to really kind of absorb, on their knees, absorb everything we're saying here today on the podcast. What do you think about that, Bartek?
Yeah, I'm sweating. I'm so hot.
Okay, Bartek, no need to let the people know that you're so attractive. They can just listen and hear the pure sex factor from your voice.
All buttons are undone.
Spit and Polish is the name of the podcast, likely because we're spitting hot, young Polish gentlemen, and we're here to discuss movies that have come recommended on our show Pictures Powwow, in which, yes, we sit down, we have a bit of a powwow, a bit of a chitter-chatter about a movie that came recommended. I recommended this week's movie. Next week, the recommendations will be listeners, and then the week after will be you, Bartek, because that's the format. That's the way we do it. This is a little movie club, a little movie recommendations. And 2025 is, as I bravely declared, the year in which we look back at older cinema, and I've still kept to that track. So this week on the podcast, we are looking at the Japanese film Late Spring. For those who have not seen this before, I highly recommend that you do. There's a Criterion version of this film available out there for you all, but there's also a version of it on YouTube. But please find a copy that is good and works for you. So Late Spring is a 1949 Japanese movie that... Well, Bartek, how would you describe the story of this to someone who hasn't seen it, but you want them to watch it?
Man, we really jumped really quick into talking about the movie.
Yeah, why not?
So the story of Late Spring, it is a very focused story, just about, a family. It's a father and his daughter. His daughter is like late 20s, which, in Japanese culture, that's getting kind of to the late stages of marriage age.
She literally just had a school reunion, so she would probably be around 28 years old. Yeah,
27, 28. And she hasn't gotten married yet. She's very happy just living with her father and looking after him. And, her father, her aunt, and some other, people in their community are kind of trying to push her to... The whole film isn't necessarily about that, but there's a big talk about, trying to get her to, get married and, move on with her life the way that everyone else has and, seek her own happiness kind of thing.
There's an expectation. This film deals a lot with cultural values of the time. Again, this is from 1949, and there is a lot of discussion about how the culture has been reshaped due to the Second World War. There's this beautiful scene in which the father and the aunt are having this kind of friendly banter back and forth about how brides nowadays gorge themselves at their ceremony. And then there's this whole thing, back in my day, we would never do that. I wouldn't eat a single piece of rice. And he just shakes his head and says, "Oh, but things have changed now. Nowadays, if you were there, you would. He
pushes her to admitting, yeah, you're right, I would.
And it's because of, the war happened and we didn't have food for so long. So now everyone's... But this film is very simple on the surface. We say the story is about a woman being kind of persuaded or pushed to get married, and what do you do about that? And in another storyteller's hands, in another filmmaker's hands, this could be a rom-com starring Sarah Jessica Parker. That type of feeling, but there's such a quiet sensitivity. This is a real slice of life affair. There is no sense of in the third act, we're going to have the drama raise up to this, and we really need to make sure that the father looks like he needs her help and he's sickly. No, it's really played naturalistically. There's an honesty to this movie, and that's why I think everyone, you should really give this a watch for yourself, because yeah, we're going to talk about the details of it. Yeah, we're going to get into the minutia, but there's just a certain attitude and atmosphere that just you can't translate into words.
This is absolutely a type of film that someone who is completely unfamiliar with Japanese values and especially, the stuff about marriage would walk into this and be very feel the dissonance of like what they're proposing versus, what a Western value might be.
We can talk about that since you've touched it. I was thinking about that a lot. Of course, a lot of Japanese values and culture is in this movie, and especially from this era, from when it came out. And there's even talk about how these attitudes are changing. Divorce is just a fun thing people do. Like, that's less frowned upon than her potentially being a spinster. While, say, in the Western culture, I don't know, like, I feel like if you get divorced, there's a lot more shunning to it than if you didn't get married at all. But I was wondering about that, of like, is this such a uniquely Japanese thing? Like, this whole premise of this movie. And I was thinking about it a lot, and I get it, it is very much so, but there's also so much about her situation, her desires, and how everyone around her is trying to push her into being this certain value set that they believe is the healthy one, the appropriate one, the end goal. And I think it is something that translates over to Western media. I mean, I made a joke about it before, but like, yeah, there would be a rom-com version of this movie starring, insert whichever comedic actress of the decade you want.
For sure. I just meant that like there might be some people that would watch this and think like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
everyone in this film except, the main character Noriko is wrong.
Yeah. Yes, 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 yes. But I feel like especially certain types of families, maybe as Australians, there's a bit of a divide. But I feel like having grown up around a lot of European families, I mean, even you may be able to shed some light on this as someone who's in their 30s, single, about like how certain family members may be like, "Hey, have you got a girlfriend? Are you going to get married? You're going to have kids? You're going to do this, this, this? Why aren't you doing that?"
We're talking about my dad now?
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. Hi, Bartek's dad.
Hey, Dad.
Hi, how are the toilets in the house? Are they flushing well? But yeah, there's, because the central drama of it is pretty simple, of just like people saying, "Why aren't you getting married?" And yet, to me, this was such a compelling film. I was drawn in by every scene, all of these characters. I felt for. I understood where each one of them was coming from, even if, as you said, most of them are from where we are at wrong for doing what they're doing. I understood it. I was like, oh, I get why you're like this. I mean, I know people who are like this to some degree.
That was one thing that I really liked about this film was, first of all, I walked in knowing like the whole attitude about like marriage and ages and things like that. So partway through, I was wondering like, okay, is this a straightforward film that is proposing, the common values, or is this like a film that questions that? Because we get a lot of, our main girl getting conflicted about things, and even at the end, there's a sense of like, she's gonna give it a red hot go, but she is, feeling down about it. Like you don't see her face for a lot of that final scene. But yeah, that honesty thing. I'm thinking back, one of the films that we did recently, or most of the films we did recently, we've been doing a lot of black and white films this year. And I have mentioned in some of those episodes, like, how accessible is this going to be? I think I talked about that with M a lot. Because, this is a film from an older time. It's also a different culture. Will it be something that I have to acclimate myself to? Or is it going to be something that I'm just going to be like right in there from the beginning? And I was surprised at how accessible this film was, because when you think of traditional Japan, you might think order, discipline, conservative, like very almost like military dad kind of thing going on. But everyone in this film is just so warm to each other, and it feels timeless in that way. Like from the very first scene, you've got this scene where a bunch of women are around a table. I thought it was like a marriage interview or something.
Hmm.
And they're just like giggling to each other about things, talking about
Apologizing for being late.
apologizing for being late, or the trains. And it's like, oh, I've got these clothes that are falling apart. Like, oh, I can fix them. And then someone else comes in, they bow multiple times, but they still have that kind of like joyful energy about them. All of the interactions between the main girl and her dad are just so warm. Yeah, it was just really pleasant.
I recommended this not knowing much about it. I am aware of the filmmaker. His reputation, Ozu, is one of the big guys. He's a favorite of many filmmakers. We have done Kurosawa on this podcast, and he was one of his favorite filmmakers. So it's like a filmmaker's filmmaker, an actor's filmmaker as well. But I had not seen any of his stuff. The big one is Tokyo Story, which some say is a part of a trilogy of films that this is the beginning of. His kind of pseudo trilogy of things. But I've not seen Tokyo Story either. I've not seen any of his films, but I chose this one because it was a little bit earlier. I didn't want to just immediately do the thing. I was like, I'll jump into the big, well-known one. I wanted to kind of see the step or two before that, and perhaps one day we'll go back to Tokyo Story. But I knew the basic premise was about a father and daughter living together who are both adults. I didn't know about the marriage aspect of this. I didn't know what kind of tone we were going to get. I didn't know a lot of things that you said, like how accessible this is going to be. I knew that it was one of the popular ones of this filmmaker, but I just kind of took a chance with it. And the film opens up and you get the text, and one of them says it's like, it's about a father and daughter. I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. And then things come along, and it takes quite some time for the film to reveal its hand of what the narrative is going to be. The thing that we said is the log line of the movie, because it is just a bunch of people living their lives. She's going the Noriko, she's going out, and she's at the bar with one of the dad's friends or colleagues, and then oh, there's the aunt, and she's talking, and they're just people just living their day-to-day life, and you're wondering, okay, is this just going to be what the movie is? I was happy. Yeah. I was just happy to just see the movie be like, here are people just walking around talking. I was actually kind of relieved that in the first like 10, 15 minutes, I wasn't hammered in of like, here's what the plot is going to be. He's going to be the narrative. It was just
or being hammered by like, oh, that's obvious foreshadowing.
Yeah, it was just people being with one another in ways that felt from the past, but also of today, from a different culture, but also something that I can see in my everyday life as well. That's the beauty of, entertainment, of cinema, that it can make you connect with things that you yourself don't experience in everyday life. And that's what I was really smitten by in the first like 15, 20 minutes of this. I was just writing down in my notes, I just want to spend more time with the dad. I just want to spend more time with the aunt. I just want to spend more time with these people. And as we've talked about on the podcast before, I think over the years I've been kind of more drawn to character-driven films than necessarily plot narrative-driven films. So this was just a blast for me. So did you know much going into this, and what did you think of this overall? Were you happy with this?
I didn't know much about this at all. No, I might have heard the director's name at some point. I've heard of Tokyo Monogatari, Tokyo Story, but didn't know anything about it. Still don't really. So yeah, obviously didn't know anything about this film, but yeah, I had a really good time. It's a film that, it's just shy of 2 hours. And it is one where I felt the time, but as I've said before, that's not always, a bad thing. Like, I really enjoyed just seeing these lives play out. It didn't ever get that old. There was one point in the film where they went to see a no theater play. That scene dragged a little bit for me, but other than that, like, yeah, this film just kind of flew by.
I like that scene because it was almost like the calm before the storm. It was like them just having a nice moment of something, and then from that point on, tensions, stress. the neurotics, start to
Yeah.
kind of bubble up. The division within the happiness of
Yeah.
the family starts to become more and more and more apparent as
I
we
liked
go on.
I liked also that they gave good detail for, why they're in that situation. It's not just like, oh, a quirk of who Noriko is. It might be. There are
Hmm.
people online who seem to have argued that, maybe she was asexual or gay
Yeah.
or something. But there is a scene somewhere where they talk about, the war that happened just a few years prior, and how during that time she was put to a lot of work. She became very sick and has only like kind of recently gotten her health back. So if she is like 27, 28, and the war ended like 4 years prior, then she would have had like her whole early 20s during wartime. And, that's not really a time to find love and get married. So she just lived a more, I almost said normal adult life when it's wartime, where she lived a more, typically single adult lifestyle, got used to that, and that's the situation she's in. She is content just
Hmm.
living with her father and looking after him, and everyone else is conflicted because they got married outside of that wartime and they know the benefits that it can bring you if you like really
Mm.
dedicate yourself to it, and they want that for her. And the conflict is, trying to convince her to give that a go.
The father is so magnificently played.
Mm.
The director, you worked with him for most of his films, from what I read. I think it was like 52 out of the 54 films the director did had this actor in it.
Wow. Can you
The
imagine?
actor is a fan, like a favorite of many people. I can't remember which director it is. A Western director said very proudly, like that guy is the father of cinema. Like he
Mm.
is the guy that you point to as that's what a dad is in movies. Because he often plays
Yeah. Actor is named
father,
Chishu Ryu.
often plays father roles or grandfather roles, and you can just feel that he has such a warmth, such a friendliness, but there's a history there. There's something that we aren't being told, and we do eventually like figure it out and get told bit more about his character. But there's just so much with him. But this goes to this central relationship, which is the things that are unsaid that perhaps should be said aloud, but they don't. And I wanted to get your opinions on this too. And please go into even more about the dad as well. But what do you feel about how they portrayed him as someone needing assistance to survive? Because I felt like they played it just right, in which most of the time it felt like he didn't need anyone. He could just be fine on his own. Then they just drop in these little details, these little observations, these little things that he would say and do that made me sit back and go, maybe he does need someone with
Mm.
him.
Well, a lot of the traits that you learn about him, it's not necessarily that he's like got a huge disability or anything. From a Western perspective, you might even call them like kind of bumbling dad kind of qualities. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't do the laundry enough.
Burns
He
food.
he burns food. He's not that great at cooking. So, having a traditional woman around the house to help look after him, means that he can live his life great. And if his daughter goes away, that means that, he won't have that, quote unquote convenience around, and he have to kind of look after himself. And yeah, I didn't really see it as commenting on like this is a flawed person that needs that. It's just like this is the comfort that he is living with, and this is something that he will have to sacrifice by giving his daughter away to marriage. There's a conversation he has with his friend who, or another friend who also had a daughter that got married. We're talking like, it'd be so much easier if we had sons, then we could, they'd get married and blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, well, like what we did, we married a father's daughter and had that happen. Um, so yeah, I liked how he understood, that, yeah, it will make my life a little bit harder if you're not around, but, you deserve happiness. That's what, all of us have been trying to strive for this whole time. We want your happiness.
And her reason for not wanting to pursue what they all believe is happiness is in part because she feels the need to use these statements of like, no, he can't look after himself. He needs this. He needs that. But everything you said is about his like traits as a person is spot on. But at the same time, you can see why someone like her, who's also like we went through, had to live this very specific type of life, feels the desire, feels the draw, and is comfortable and happy with it too. I also like with her that she makes it very clear what she wants, and she's very happy. She says, I don't want to get married, and she says it with a big smile on her face, and it's a sincere smile to my eyes. But then when she also does have like opinions on marriage, she does have feelings about people remarrying. She doesn't like that. She doesn't like specifically her dad, but she doesn't like his friend is filthy. She thinks that's like a line too far. And she doesn't understand. Even when her friend is like, "Oh, I'll bat it out next time," she's like, "Really? You're gonna remarry after everything you went through? You're gonna still do that, huh?" Like she has hang-ups about that, and I appreciate that being included to her because it obviously gives like a drama between her and her dad during the movie when he is saying that he is going to potentially remarry himself, and it gives her the push to leave. But I like it too because it doesn't make her just this, purely like bubbly, nice person who's just like, no, I don't want to get married. I'm happy. Teehee. Like she gets angry about remarriage, and she has like really strong held beliefs. And it's like, is that because her mother is no longer around? And it's like the idea of her dad getting married, or does this spawn from her own thing about getting married? And who knows? It's like we can have conversations about this for a very long time, but the film isn't necessarily interested in opening all of that up. It just is allowing it to be this. Everything's like underneath the surface. That's this movie. Everything's like underneath the surface, and you're like, people just talk about it, but they're not going to talk about it. They're just going to keep doing what they think the other person wants, but they don't.
I like that the film even had moments where they acknowledge like, are you doing this just to satisfy us? Is this genuinely something that you are happy to do? Like they had the self-awareness to ask her and make sure that like she really is making the right informed decision.
What do you think about our lead character, a woman that everyone is saying you aren't living life right?
Yeah, I really, really liked her performance. I liked how she had a dynamic with basically every character. To the point that like, oh man, there are so many characters that only appeared in one scene that like I would have wanted to see
the little boy,
like the little boy who like she teased him a whole bunch.
He's being such a bitch to him, and he's like, "You nag, leave me alone."
Like, oh, she's like a funny little big sister, funny big sister character to this boy, and that was a fun little dynamic that I want to see a bit more. But yeah, a lot of it is her talking to her older relatives or like her father's friends. Yeah, there was that one scene where I think they went out to a restaurant or something, and the friend asked, what was it? Who's more handsome, this guy or me? And she's like, you, of course. Like, I'm going to pay for your lunch now. It was funny. You can tell that there's like a rapport between them.
Or when she went on that date that wasn't a date, when they were riding the bicycles. And
yeah, with his assistant, I think it was.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. There's a lot of good stuff with that too, where the father and I think the aunt were saying like, well, what about if those two got married? And when he got home, she got home, he started asking her about like, oh, you were biking with him? He asked all of these questions, and like most of the answers were like positive toward, pointing towards like, oh, a relationship between you two could happen. Only like one or two answers were like, oh, okay, maybe not. And then she finally asked a question like, hey, well, what about marrying him? And just, it's this high, like, climax of this, potential plot thread. And then she reveals like, no, that's ridiculous. And you're thinking, oh, because she, is not into marriage. And she points out he's already engaged.
Yep.
And it just like deflates that plot line. It's like, oh, wow.
And you see
I wasn't expecting that.
You see the father kind of retreat inwards on himself. Like, oh, I shouldn't have.
We spent 15 minutes building this up, and now it's gone.
But it's satisfying the way that movie.
Oh, I'm not complaining.
Yeah,
I loved it.
But I'm saying, like, for those listening, like, there's there's something satisfying about how this movie does that. Why is that the case though? Like, you could say if you list this in another movie, that would be like, oh, see, failed little thread of a thing just got cut off abruptly. Like, why does this movie have the ability to make that a part of what is the charm?
I think it just is because it feels so real and welcoming. We're describing so many things in this film, like, oh yeah, these characters are going through something really stressful. But then I watched this film on the YouTube upload. I scroll down and there's like 2 comments saying like, oh man, if I could live in the world of any film, it would be this one.
Would you guys, where every member of the family is trying to force you into a thing you don't want to do? I don't know, post World War II Japan, where they're still
They
recoiling.
didn't say they wanted to be Noriko. They just wanted to live in the world.
Oh, you mean post World War II Japan?
Yeah,
where
look how nice it is, right?
Oh, okay. They rode bicycles in that one scene, so everything is fine. I want to talk about the filmmaking itself for just a moment. It's fly on the wall. Like, the camera doesn't move very much. Like, it's very locked down. It is at a lower level. Apparently, that's a trademark of this director, is he likes having the camera low down.
Yeah, now that you mention it,
it was never
low.
In the center. That's what I was referencing at the start. The idea is it's at eye level of a Japanese person when they're sitting.
Yeah, and the kneeling pose.
The kneeling pose. That's why it's always like that. He apparently early in his career tried to use cranes and do aerial shots, and he did away with them. He's like, nope, they are just... They are not tools of cinema. You know, he never did dissolves. He just did cuts. And it was the frequency of the cuts that would create the scene for him. So you definitely do see that as the movie goes on, especially when Noriko and the father are on their little final trip and holiday together, and like how the cuts just keep kind of increasing, and how they will just cut away to random objects as well, which I don't know the truth of this, but one of the things that this director is credited with inventing is I think they called it the pillow cut, the idea of during a character's emotional climax and turmoil, you cut to an ordinary object, which we've seen many, many times over in movies, but this director was one of the pioneers of that style. And it's kind of think about just that. Isn't that like such a weird thing to think about? Like, yeah, I guess someone had to come up with that.
Yeah, I know a lot of people point out Evangelion and stuff like that do that a lot.
Yeah, but it's something that we're so accustomed to that you don't think about, like, oh, what filmmaker really made that their thing to begin with? And people point to this one. But what did you think of the overall look of the film, the construction, like the production of it, or what did you and the music and so on and so forth?
I suppose that whole thing about like the kneeling pose angle for a lot of it kind of does lend itself to that idea of feeling that you're there or wanting to be there. You know, because you see so many people in the film kneeling at, you know, basically every table, that it does lend itself that realism, like you're in their kind of position as well. And yeah, it also gave you an intimate look at things. You didn't really get like, you know, super wide angle shots of, you know, rooms or anything like that. You are just kind of in the middle there, almost like a set.
But since the camera's a little further down, you kind of get a different angle of a room than you would what we are so much more accustomed to. It's like you feel like you're crouching down in a conversation with people, which is cool. I love with Japanese movies or media when you get to be inside of a house and you get to see like how things are laid out in very particular ways, and like, you know, taking the shoes off and the doors and the kneeling and all of that. And their abode is very sparse, you know, it's very wide open spaces and that. But depending on the scene, there will be moments in which, like, say, a character like Noriko is feeling a lot of things. She'll walk over and she's like leaning on a balcony and she's like looking out the window, and like the window looks like it's looking out to a bunch of brick wall. And in that scene, now it's like visually noisy and cluttered. Like you got the window with like the window there, and you got the bricks there, and you got like a suitcase here, and her jacket's hanging on this thing, and now it's like visually noisy, and it's like a great visual way of telling you like things are very complicated right now in comparison to the scenes where it's her and her dad talking, or the aunt and they're folding clothes and everything's so serene. Just look at their plate. Like, let's look at where they're sitting. There's just not much. It's not drawing the eye.
Mm. Yeah, when I'm thinking back on this film, a lot of the scenes that come to my mind are the ones that are set by that father's desk. You know, you're kind of sitting against the wall. The desk is on the right side of the frame, and he's sitting facing that right side. You know, turned to talk to his daughter who just walked in. You can tell that like the door is behind that wall on the right. And whenever you have moments where she moves to the left to the kitchen, you get like that angle in the hallway. Sometimes she goes up the stairs that you see there, you get the angle up there. So a lot of the scenes where there is like movement going around the house, like when she comes back from the marriage interview and she doesn't want to talk, even though like she agrees to the marriage interview, it does feel like, oh wow, a lot of the scenes we're just kind of sitting still a lot of the time, but now we're moving around a lot. It kind of does feel like, you know, we're chasing someone around the house being like, what's wrong? Is everything all right?
There's a melodic quality to this. There's a very deliberate, plodding pace to this, and I think that's reinforced by the music. The music tonally stays at the same level for the majority of this. Like, it's very nice. And especially in those first 20 minutes or so, it's always playing. It's always, every scene is scored. Every scene has music. Every scene is like in the background is very nice. But as we get into it more, it starts to kind of get further in the back of the track, and you kind of just don't notice it as much anymore. And then you're realizing, oh, this scene doesn't have any music in it. Oh, like it now has a punctuation where we started off and like everything's fine and happy, and look at this, and they're riding bicycles, ding ding ding, and the music's playing and everything's so nice and happy, and the music is kind of still going, and it's kind of aggressive in how much it's keeping at the same level, emotionally speaking, like its tone. And then you're like, oh, okay, we're just gonna keep going like this, and then it kind of fades away as things get more, I guess, real for the characters, even though everything feels real already, because I feel so much for everyone here, and yet where do you land on the problem? Because the film is, when it comes to like whether or not she should marry, like you could take it so many directions, because I don't feel like the film is overwhelmingly judgmental, but also it does end on a particular image that kind of seals up in my mind, like where the film's opinion lays on things. But like, what do you interpret, or how was your reaction to this central conflict and conceit?
Yeah, like I said, I was really curious to see if like it would play the values straight and traditional, or if it would kind of give that turn. And while it did in the end go playing it straight, like she does go through with the marriage, she does move out, I really did like how the film was pretty honest with the, sort of stress and doubt about the situation. Like, Noriko is very consistent throughout the film about, having second thoughts about the marriage even after she agrees to it, still feeling like, maybe this isn't right for me, but in the end, just trusting her family that loves her and, going through with this. I remember for a lot of it, I was on both of their sides throughout, but when they've had that second last conversation where he really pushed her to like, you should do this. He pointed out, I'm 56 years old. I'm near the end of my life. I won't be here forever. You need to make sure that you carve out the happiness that I carved out for myself when, for many years, the woman that I married, we didn't have a comfortable life, but we worked on it and we did build that for ourselves. And obviously, since the mother's not around, it didn't last forever. But he wants her to give it a go as well. Try to, make a happiness for yourself so that, when I'm not around, you're not going to be looking after just yourself.
But how much by the end of the movie does he believe that statement? With everything that transpires, he may believe it in that moment, but I feel like by the end, where he's finally alone and he's peeling and he's crying. I feel like there's a level of
Well, certainly for himself, like he is pushing that ideal because that is, the traditional thing to do. He knows that, yeah, I'm going to be struggling for this, but I need to be selfless about it. And he just doesn't want to show that weakness to his daughter because that would give her more doubt.
Yeah. I'm there. I see the sides of this. I may not agree with them all, but I see them, and I feel sorry for her because she was happy. She was happy. This is what she wanted, and everyone said that's not what you want. This is what you should want. Even people who are ill-equipped to say that, like that friend who's been divorced. But it's expected of you. These cultural values, these things. And yes, I was wondering too, like, was the movie going to be a story about the dangers or the perils or like the pitfalls of traditional conservative values? Or was it going to be what you said of reaffirming it? And it falls in the middle in a weird way. Like there's moments where it goes one way, moments where it goes another. And that's, I think, a positive because it's not so much like pointing its finger at Japanese society or people who are like this and saying, why are you like this? Can't you just let people be happy the way that they want to be happy? But it's not being naive enough to say like Noriko is 100% correct. Like, is she thinking only in the short term?
We said the H word earlier. This is an honest film. It is telling you that, yes, we are proposing to, follow traditional values, but we're not saying that that's easy. In fact, in certain situations, like for Noriko, who has had, a very tough adulthood so far, it will be especially difficult.
But there is something to why do you have to trap yourself in these images and these perceptions of what it is to be a person? Whether it is Japan or you see here, like there is this expectation still to this day. We could say that it's lesser, but it's still this thing where you're expected to, go to school, get a job, get a partner, marry, have kids, die. Like that's what you're expected to do. And if you aren't doing that, then you must be not happy. Like, I mentioned at the beginning of this, and, I'm sure you can feel free if you like to talk about your experiences, but I'm sure that there are people who are not just your father who may look at your situation and go, well, Bartek, is he happy? Just being a person who goes to work and does the, he hasn't got a girlfriend or a partner. Is he going to marry? He's going to have,
Guys, I have a podcast.
Yeah, and he's married to me. But you would say, well, no, I am happy, so why should I have to relinquish all of that because of this?
Yeah.
And I think that is shown in the film as well. What really hit me is what was sacrificed was their relationship. The father-daughter relationship was sacrificed. And I took the ending as him kind of realizing that he took it for granted. Because that was him. He was content. He was comfortable. But she actively was happy with it. I think he took their relationship for granted. I think he even says, like, when they were doing their trip, I'm realizing I wish we spent more time together.
Yeah.
And now he's alone and he's peeling, what was it, an apple, I want to say?
Yeah.
And he starts to break down. And, I took it as like, yeah, you're alone now. And like, yeah, she's married. She did the thing that you thought, like, when I say he thought that, he was pressured into thinking that too, by the way. Like, when he had the
they're all living in the same culture, yeah.
Yeah. When he was first talked to by the aunt about it, his reaction, again, this performance is so great that he makes just going, have 1,000 different interpretations to it. But when he did that the first time, when he was just like, when the aunt was listing, like, you should remarry this person and she should do this, he was just inquisitive, I took it as him just fobbing her off.
Yeah.
She took it as confirmation.
Yeah, especially because he has a very similar conversation with his daughter, and he basically points out, like, yeah, it's not really going to happen.
Yeah. So I kind of took it as, at the end of the day, I think he is grieving the fact that he forced her into something that neither of them actually wanted at the end of the day, and that he sacrificed his relationship with his child because of what? Because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to
If
do
you
that.
love them, you have to sacrifice, Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the film, but also just in your everyday life stuff, what do you feel about this thing overall? Like yourself as a person? Like, we can talk about like what we think the movie is, but like, where do you land on it as an individual?
Yeah, definitely. I'll point out that for, my analysis and looking at this film, I am trying to put myself more into their context.
Mm-hmm.
For myself, obviously, I would be a little bit more like Noriko. Like, look, if you are happy, then obviously go for that. I give the film the credit against my point there about, like, your happiness is based on you're living with this one relative who, by their own admission, is near the end of their life. And so, you might have to think ahead there. But yeah, if you are happy in your situation and nothing's really all that wrong, then yeah, pursue it and see what you can make out of it following that path.
With my life, I'm married, haven't got any kids. But it was so interesting because no one in my life expected anything of that. Like, it's not like they didn't, but it was never asked. It was never, like, inquisitive of, like, when I was a teen or in my 20s or, even when I got into a relationship with Rachel, no one was really kind of asking, like, are you going to marry and have kids until we got engaged, of course. And that's like, well, then you obviously ask that. That's, like, the logical progression of things. But when I got around, so I never thought about it either. Like I've said this, like my relationships have just been things that have happened. I've never actively pursued. So there's a part of me that relates to Noriko, even though I'm not in her situation. Like I never actively pursued a romance, or I never had this idea of like, oh, I've got to get married. I never had to be concerned in my mind because it was never this reinforced belief system. But I can relate to where she's coming from of like, I don't want to. And I'm like, well, if she doesn't want to, then just leave her. She's just let her be. She seems happy. She seems like she's got a support network around her. Why isn't that good enough? And I understand, from the time and not even just Japanese culture, but just people groups, like I've seen people, do this stuff. Like I've had friends who come from Italian families. Let me tell you, they're like, gotta get married.
I was literally thinking this whole time, like, who would have like the ultimate laugh at this film? And it would be people from cultures where like the family all live together in one big building. Like I think an Italian family might be a bit more like that.
Of course,
like the family from Oscar.
Of course,
like yeah, we've got many couples in this house.
This matchmaking, the
marriage interviews.
I see some people online kind of be annoyed that the film is like pushing like this whole arranged marriage concept, which to many Westerners is like a scary idea, but I thought the film handled it well, like how they explained it, how they put a human face to it, because when you think, if you're not familiar with arranged marriages and how they work in certain cultures, it sounds intimidating and amoral or immoral. Like it sounds wrong. It's where we come from, but the way that this story kind of presented it as like an everyday thing, it was kind of just like, well, this is how it works.
Yeah,
I kind of got it.
Like I mentioned before, like the first scene, I'm like, oh, this must be a marriage interview, because I've seen that a million gajillion times in Japanese media. Last year we watched Azumanga Daioh, and there was one episode where one of the teachers was like, oh, I've got to go to this marriage interview, and it's just a thing that happens even nowadays.
Yeah.
It's a different type of arranged marriage where you're looking at candidates, and they even tell Noriko at one point, like, meet with them, they didn't say the marriage interview in it, but like meet them and then decide.
Yeah. They put it in her hands. Yeah.
Like it wasn't like you have to marry this guy that looks like the American baseballer. It's like meet him, and if you like him, Good. And if you don't, say no, and that's fine.
And it wasn't like, you'll disgrace the family if you don't. They were more, again, concerned about her well-being.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what they presented. Like, I think the aunt really just cared about herself in a weird way. Like, because that's their conversation, the dad and the aunt. It's like, you would? No, I would. Like, there's that, I have this certain virtue that I must uphold, that it makes me feel good. I think the aunt is a little bit more of like a self-driven character than others. But even I don't say that as a negative. I just say that as like, I think that's just a part of who she is. She means well, but I think she's a little bit more I think of her own image.
It's basically the sort of like subconscious thing based on like the culture that you grew up in. Like, obviously she loves her niece, she wants her to be happy, but a lot of the means by which she is pushing her to find that happiness is something that is culturally ingrained in her.
Would you could you answer? I may have missed it. Is she, the aunt, his sister, or the sister of the mother that's no longer around? Do we know?
That's a good question. I did not know.
I felt like she was the sister of the mother that wasn't around. Just the way that her and the dad interacted, they did not feel brother-sister as much as like in-laws.
I didn't think about it, but I did get that sense that like, oh yeah, these two probably didn't grow up with each other.
What did you feel about, at least this was how I felt, at least I don't know if you agreed, the person she gets married to is just like a non-factor in this movie. Like, they're not really going to be like, oh, now we're going to really stop everything. It's just like, it's a thing that happens. It's like
you get details about him, but secondhand.
It's all, but that's a deliberate choice, and it kind of makes the whole the whole thing feel even more murky. It's not as if we get to humanize this person that she's going to marry. It's not like we, the audience, can be like, oh, well, obviously, what a great character they are. We can see that, blah, blah, blah. No, he's obfuscated. He's just this detail of the plot rather than an actual factor.
Yeah. If he was in the film, like, probably would have been a good character. But again, because this film is so focused on Noriko's current relationships, I liked that we only got to see the current relationships, her current happiness. And I could take everything that they were saying about him at face value. Like, I don't think, there's a dark twist to that guy. He probably is a great guy. She admits, like, even when she's doubtful, she does say, yes, I will marry him, whether it's forced or not. There is that active affirmation there. Everyone else, says great things about him. They're like, yeah, he really does look handsome, just like the baseballer and the electrician.
Yeah, they say that about all the suitors. Yeah, there's never like a guy who brings his mother to ask if you'll make their child the president of the United States.
They even have they do have a scene earlier on where they're like, yeah, he comes from a good family, this, that, like he's a catch. And, based on the tone of this film, like, I take that at face value.
Of course. But it's a specific choice not to show any of these men.
Yeah.
I think it just makes the feeling of this impenetrable dread for her more concrete.
The stress in this film is uncertainty, and it does definitely, I suppose, add to that, yeah.
I have one big final thing to mention, but is there any other things of the movie that you want to talk about? Any things, scenes or characters, or more of these themes and messages that you want, or just things you noticed?
I think we've gone through all of them, I'm pretty sure, but let me just press my mind for something.
Did you like her friend?
Yeah, I liked her friend. It gave a nice little different dynamic to everyone else, because everyone else is like family, someone older than her. This is someone that she talks to on a level. Oh, everyone's older than her, the kid, obviously.
Yes,
and I liked her final scene with the dad. Like, oh, that was her, right? In the final scene? Yeah. I liked her scene with dad. Like, I'll visit you sometimes. I'll help out every now and then. He like holds her to it.
Yeah, but do you believe it?
No, maybe,
because the way that scene played out, at first she's like, "Of course I'll come visit you, yeah," and then sometimes, like because she's a bit of a flaky person.
She is, yeah.
So, but again, that's what I was curious, because then we follow that, then we follow it up, and then the dad's by himself, and it's like the sadness. It's like, yeah, there won't be anyone. Real, there may be some people who visit, but there's not going to be a real connection. He isn't going to remarry either. Like, he lied. he lied. That was the biggest lie he ever told. And what do you feel about this character who's been so virtuous and nice, but he did lie and manipulate his daughter into the valley? It wasn't just he gave her a speech that made her say, "Oh, I see it your way." He did lie. He said, "I'm going to do this thing I know you object to push you to do this," and then he's not actually going to do it.
Again, it just leads back to the fact that everyone does feel in some way conflicted with the situation, and that's just his way of it. I'm not. It doesn't make him an antagonist or anything.
No, but it does show like the lengths people are willing to go to make other people happy, even if it means hurting themselves or the people that they're trying to make happy. The big thing that I want to talk about is the director himself.
Yes, Yasujiro Ozu.
I don't know if you did any reading on this film or him as a person, but we say all of this stuff.
Oh, I did read some trivia. Yeah, he never married.
He never married and lived with his mother until she died, and then he died a couple of years later. And he, like, from little bits I've read about him, he was like Noriko. It was like, I don't need to get married. I don't know why people have a big deal about it. I'm just doing my thing. I love my mum. But yet, you would expect, if you knew that fact, oh, well, there's going to be that as the driven thing of the movie. And yet, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like he's probably taking from his own life experiences this concept, and he's weaving it into something that feels a little bit more non-subjective in a weird way. Like, it doesn't feel like this is the director's, like, with everything that you know about that, it doesn't feel like this film is now transformed into, oh, obviously it's about how it's bad. It still feels like there's these nuances and layers to it. And yet when you hear that, there's a party that would initially react and go, well, obviously then the film would be how the way he lived is the appropriate one to do. But the movie, as we've said, shows a lot of light on all of the sides that way.
It's showing it's not as simple as, just follow the traditional values.
Yeah, so I recommend this. I think this is a wonderful movie. It's a tearjerker, it's a heartbreaker in its little ways, but
also a heartwarmer.
It's a heartwarmer. It does the thing that you love to see not only from foreign cinema, but from cinema of a different time, which is it transports you into that world, into that way of life. As I said at the beginning, entertainment, film, in this case, it can make you sympathize and empathize and muse and think about things that you yourself don't experience. And that doesn't mean it has to be extravagant genre work or big melodrama. This here is a quiet, dare I say, character study. Like, it's a character study in a way, but it's, when you say character study, there's a certain connotation that comes with that this film also isn't interested in. Everything's...
Yeah, this film isn't like Joker or
falling down,
or whatever, or falling down.
Oh yeah, of course. But
I listed thrillers that are character studies. Yeah,
I thought about. Obviously, this is a much more dramatically different, over the top thing. But we did Matsuko.
Memories of Matsuko. Yeah,
Memories of Matsuko popped in my brain at times during this, but very different films. But just that central of, like, here's this female character that's trying to do everything that they love, like, that they believe is the right thing to do, and society's pushing them.
She's living in an untraditional manner.
Yeah, but you recommend?
Definitely, yeah. This was a great film. I recommend it. Just make sure that you are willing to, follow, understand where the film's coming from with its values. Because if you walk in just with your hard-held beliefs and anything that goes against it is, like, on your shit lists, this might be a film where you're just saying, nope, you're wrong for 2 hours. Obviously, that was not the case for either of us, so maybe I'm strawmanning in that manner, but yeah, just make sure that you understand what the film is saying.
Yes. So the next recommendation is the listening people's recommendation. And we're staying in Japan, and we're revisiting an old franchise of ours.
Okay.
From this commenter, one of our favorite commenters on our YouTube.
Dr. Rashes.
We're going to Patlabor 2, the movie.
Mm.
Neither of us have seen Patlabor 2. We've seen Patlabor 1. We've never seen the show or the OVA.
Yep. Our whole history is go back a couple of months ago, as of this recording, to our Patlabor 1 episode.
We're just going to watch the second film, and then we'll come back and talk about it. I don't know anything about it other than I brought up when we did Patlabor 1, I brought up like this stuff in a Discord group, and somebody said, oh, Patlabor 1's great, but Patlabor 2's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's a big statement to say.
Multiple sources like, oh, the second film, yeah, that's a masterpiece. Like, this is a hyped up film.
But I'll be keen to see it because we did very much enjoy it, and it is one where at some point I would love to revisit and swing back around and go to that OVA at some point to see what that's like. Because from what and we'll talk about this more next week, but from what I understand, it's a comedy.
Yeah.
And the movie, and I don't know about the second one, not so much. On comedy, there are the moments of levity, not so much.
Yeah, it was like a thriller about like a religious nut cultist.
What was it? They had like some type of burger I love, like slop burger or something.
Oh, yeah, it was like the greasy burger or something.
Yeah, it was lovely. But we'll be back next time.
That was a pizza, wasn't it?
Yeah, slop pizza. You want some slop pizza?
Greasy pizza or something.
We will be back next time to talk about Patlabor 2, the movie. Hopefully, everyone can find a copy of this film. I'm sure it's out there available.
Hopefully, Daily Motion has it as well.
Yes. I actually didn't double check where we can find this, but I thought, I want to watch Patlabor 2, the movie. We've been watching a lot of anime in our spare time.
We literally watched like 2 yesterday.
And I've been thinking about, oh man, Patlabor. We got to get to Patlabor. But
for all our anime fans, we finished Fate Zero and we watched Gudetama: An Excellent Adventure.
Oh, lovely. But everyone, you can find us on social medias, Facebook and Twitter under Spit and Polish Presents. You can recommend movies to us on there or let us know your thoughts and opinions, as well as directly contact us over at our email, which is what, Bartek?
The email is spitandpolished@gmail.com.
And that is our time here on the podcast done for this week. We shall be back, as we said, next time to talk about some more Japanese media. This was great. I'm glad. And I am excited to check out more films from this director. There's always that sense of like, I don't know, trepidation when you are watching an acclaimed director, one of great note, one that's like a filmmaker's filmmaker, and are they going to be as good as everyone says?
I know that
they were. I really liked it.
There is that whole notion about like, I'm going to revisit the classics, and if I don't like it, maybe people will be like, oh, well, what do you know, you dumb guy? You can't appreciate good cinema. And I remember a couple of years ago, there's the YouTuber Your Movie Sucks, YMS. And I think it was on like the Clips channel, where it was just like a short clip from one of his streams, where someone asked him that question about like, how do you approach going back and watching one of the cinematic greats from the classic era? And he had a really good answer to that. He basically phrased it as like, okay, does watching the film feel like homework? It's like, if you have that notion of like watching the film feels like homework, then that says something about like the actual quality or merit of the film. If it's something that you can enjoy without feeling like, oh, I just went through like homework or a lecture, then that actually shows like a timelessness. And, did we feel like this film or any of the films we've done this year so far have been homework?
Not at all.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of like, oh, that's the accessibleness, that it didn't feel like homework.
Exactly. What is a film for you, a classic that you feel has been homework?
So I've done it multiple times where I've said like, oh, I want to check out this film again, so I've recommended it for the podcast so I can give it a fair go. A classic film that I've watched only once so far, that I watched because like, oh, everyone says this is a great film and I didn't really get anything out of it, was actually Casablanca.
Oh.
I want to give that one a actual proper go.
Wow. Casablanca. Mine's gone with the wind, so we have 2 biggies. So there you go, everyone. You can spit on us Polish men now for saying such heresy.